This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. The audience continues to expand and grow, and we appreciate everybody being here and listening and treating Real Agriculture as one of your key information sources. Today on the program, we got a RealAg Issues panel. Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner will be with us, as well as Cherilyn Nagel, farmer for Mossbank. She's a speaker. Also, she's a new, kind of relatively fresh into, she's now a Nuffield Scholar. It's a big deal. We're going to hear about her project here today on the show. So big congrats to her. We've got issues around 282 and the bloc telling Liberals pass 282 or else the government falls. How about that? We've got some new data on pickup trucks and should there be more regulation around them because they are too heavy and they are increasing the amount of fatalities when it comes to car crashes. And we've got a lot of news around canola with China, as well as with some biofuel news out of the U.S. on 45Z and some new bipartisan legislation coming out of the Senate and the House. We'll also have time today for a beef market update with Anne Wasko with Gateway Livestock Exchange. Prices continue to be strong, and we'll get a general outlook from her and what we can expect in the back half of 2024. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get going with the beef market update right after this.
Get ready for tillage season with the high-speed disc from Brandt. Cut and size residue, create ideal seed beds, and level ruts faster than any other tillage machine. It's a better field finish and fewer passes, so you can stay on schedule, no matter what fall throws at you. And right now, you can get yours with a $12,000 rebate. There's never been a better time to bring your operation up to speed. Visit Brandt.ca for details.
Joined right now by the Director of Agronomy with Nutrien, Dr. Carl Wyatt. As farmers wrap up harvest, what should they be thinking about for that 25 season?
Checking the bank account, and I don't just mean the financial bank account, really looking at what's in the soil, especially if your crop overperformed or underperformed. Taking that soil test, checking the soil checking account can really give you some key insights on what nutrients you need to invest in next year.
What's the science of doing that test as close to the freeze up as possible?
So the phosphate's not going to move a whole lot on you from fall to spring. So getting a fall soil sample and seeing, hey, do my soils need phosphate? That's the number one reason to justify the use of a starter fertilizer. You can get that information now. So then you can use those winter months saying, well, what is the best starter fertilizer for me? Is it just a formulation with phosphate in it? Or is my soil sample telling me I need other things? You can go to your ag retailer and match the need for the starter fertilizer with the specific formulation that matches your soil sample.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's number one expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve this problem of high prices and security of supply by planning a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more. Let's talk about what's going on in the cattle markets. It's time for a beef market update with Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Anne, it is great to chat with you.
Good day, Shaun. Good to be here.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start looking south of the border. What's going on in the U.S. price-wise?
Well, good week in the U.S. on fat cattle. In the south, 1 to 2 higher. So Texas and Kansas, 184 to 185 trade this week. In the north, on the live market, a couple bucks higher in Nebraska, 186 to 187. and dressed, they were 294 delivered. So that's 2 to 4 higher. So a good market. So 2 weeks, last week market was up a bit. So it feels like the market's gaining some ground here, coming off of our early September lows. So again, be great to see another week. But this has been a good week to kind of solidify that trend. Now the cutout, that choice cutout, the wholesale market we talk about, it's still struggling big time. But again, like Lyndsey and I talked about 2 weeks ago, not a surprise from a timing perspective. The choice cutout closed last night at 296. That is $3 lower than last week. And the select is sitting about $14 back. So that is what it is. As we, get into the middle of October, we'll be expecting to see that kind of start to make its seasonal move higher as folks get things lined up for U.S. Thanksgiving and the holidays beyond. But we're still ahead of that time frame. Locally, Shaun, I don't have a lot of concrete stuff to give you for Alberta. Slow trade to get going here. I think cattle feeders are seeing the higher money in the south, and they're getting steady bids from our local packers, which has been in that 405 to 407 delivered dressed. So we'll see how the dust settles later today in terms of do we get some trade done or not. The one thing I just wanted to mention, a week ago, we had a U.S. cattle on feed report. They came in for September 1 with numbers up 1% from last year, and their placements in August were down 1%. Marketings were down 4%. So when you look at that and you go, wow, they still got more cattle on feed than a year ago, and then you compare it to that to what's the report that Canfax has been giving us for Western Canada, and we continue to see our on-feed numbers here drop versus year-ago numbers. And, even the placement numbers, year-to-date, the Americans have placed 2% less cattle on feed for the entire 2024 so far, and we're down 6%. So you just continue to see that little bit of deviation between the two reports and the two markets, and I think it all goes back to the numbers, obviously.
Why are U.S. packers a little stronger in terms of the prices relative to what's going on here in the Canadian market?
Well, I think first of all, the supply, especially in the south, has tightened, especially in Kansas, and that's the one area that we see the numbers dropping off. Placements have dropped off dramatically in Kansas in 24. So you see tighter supply starting to show up, and that was expected as we moved along here. So it's nice to see this happening. So it's a supply situation then, and of course, I don't think as the packer gets closer to that demand period that he wants to get caught short either. So he's going to certainly be trying to push this cutout to get his margin back into the black because with the cutout at 296, it's not profitable. But he knows what lies ahead in terms of the fourth quarter and demand. Yeah,
all in all, though, continued strong prices. Now,
yeah.
Do you remember a time in your career where you've been able to talk with this much longevity about this, these strong of prices for over such a given period of time?
And I was thinking about that earlier, and we'll talk about the cow market in a second, and there's a great example. But just for this length of time, well, first of all, last year we were talking about record cattle prices, right? 23 was a record. And that was coming off of the highs from 2014-15. So that was the first time we'd broken those levels. And now we've been here talking about these levels. And I get the cost structure is different. Costs are up. We've had lots of weather issues. I'm not saying that there isn't any concerns out there, but strictly from sitting in a market analyst chair and talking about cattle prices, I have never, myself witnessed in my 40-year career, prices at record levels for this length of time. So it's just, I guess I'm kind of basking in the glory right now.
Well, there's reasons to smile. That's good. Now, prices, we just talked about elevated prices, profitability. We've been talking about a lot of profit, lack of profitability in the cropping sector. How does it look in the cattle side of the equation?
Well, certainly each sector is going to be different. From a cycle perspective, this is when the cow-calf operator shines. So in terms of fall marketings last year, he would have been certainly profitable, and that would be our expectation, especially with lower feed costs and some good feed production this year. We'll be looking at another really good year in terms of the cow-calf producer. So, but again, we know that this is when he has to shine because the cycle will carry on and there'll be the next phase. So that's a cyclical discussion. I think from the cattle feeder perspective, it really depends. And I know that's easy to say, but it depends on when the cattle were bought. Did you get an opportunity to lay off some risk? And in those situations, that could be a pretty good story. Generally speaking, on spot cattle, cash to cash, the report that Canfax puts out, it's been a pretty good year, 2024. We started off with some struggles early in 24, January, February, March. The first quarter was the struggle in terms of feedlot profitability, just on that spot measurement. But really since then, the numbers have narrowed drastically in the last month. We're back to just over break even. And we'll see as we go into the fourth quarter. Can this market rally to keep feedlots, in the break-even scenario? So lots to watch for. But it's been a good year, Shaun.
Yeah, it's similar to the cropping side. When you bought your fertilizer has a big impact, and wet prices, all that kind of stuff. Similar here from a feeding perspective. Are you fully naked and you're just running in the spot on inputs and on selling, or have you hedged a portion of it or all of it, or what does that look like? It's going to spit it a little bit different. You mentioned cow slaughter. We got to get to that.
Yeah, I did want to talk about this because as we head into the fourth quarter, that's typically when their big production increases happen for non-fed or cow slaughter. So year to date, so far this year, Shaun, our cow slaughter in Canada is down 16%. We've been well off of last year's pace really since April. Now, we have to add cow exports into that because we do export a lot of cows, and our cow exports are up 16%. So when you level those two pieces out, our marketings are down 10% year to date. So that's a pretty big drop off of where we've been for cow marketings. Remember, we've come off these dry years. Cows go to town in those dry years. So that's not the case so far. We'll watch and see. We've got slaughter cow prices, even though they're off of their August highs, still at say 184 was the Canfax average last week on D2. That's still $50 $100 higher than the same time last year. And last year, Shaun, it was a record high for that week. So these cow prices, will that be enough to incentivize more to come to town? Or does that, if she's carrying a calf, that opportunity to reap some more profit with another calf is going to be forefront of mind as well.
Yeah. Wow. Steak sandwiches and hamburger for everybody. That's
yep.
Interesting.
Bring it on.
Hey, let's finish up with fall run volume. The weather playing a factor here, and the fact that we're kind of off to a bit of a slow start, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it's been a slow start. Well, it's been slow all through the summer, obviously, compared to the last few years. But even on the spot auction market volumes, they're running well off. Now, we've had a lot of forward calves sell in the last couple of weeks, but of course they won't get delivered till October and November was basically all their delivery dates. But in terms of spot volumes through markets, we are running below last year. But again, what were we, 32 degrees here in Southwest Saskatchewan 2 days ago? It just hasn't felt like fall, but it will turn and change. But I do think with these great conditions, these great grass conditions, some late moisture, producers have using the time to make those decisions in terms of their marketing plans. So we'll see that change. It's fourth quarter next week, and it's going to get busy, but it's been a slow September compared to last year.
Yeah, and do we catch up? Does November and December just make up for the slow September? There's a lot of questions and a lot of decisions at the ranching level in terms of, okay, I've got feed. Do I hold? Do I, maybe we deter from our typical marketing plan because there's a little bit bigger pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. And if we constrict supply, do we see prices go up enough where people reconsider that pot of gold? Yeah, there's a lot of things to happen. And that's why we talk to you every 2 weeks and to keep us up to date on all of it. Thanks so much. Have yourself a great weekend.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Shaun.
When we come back on RealAg Radio, we're going to get to the RealAg Issues panel. We got Cherilyn Nagel of Moss Bank, Saskatchewan, as well as Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture. They'll be with us right after this.
Whether you're in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, running your own farm operation, operating a company in ag or food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Niagara Falls on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
I am Lyndsey Smith. It is time for today's Product Spotlight with Mark Smith, CFO of Genesis Fertilizers. What are your focuses with this business?
We're raising equity from our investors and making quite crucial decisions about our engineering works and our licensing agreements.
What role will Pricewaterhouse play as the financial advisor?
So we've got a number of engagements with PwC. One of those is indeed to help us raise the capital for this project. And in accepting this appointment, they would have had a look at our plans and the credibility of our plans. So we're very pleased to appoint them for this support.
What will keep you busy in the next few weeks?
We're concluding our basis of design, so what the plant will make, negotiating our feed contract, and that's really the plan to build the house. So it's what will our chemical plant look like and making sure that that contract structure protects our investors.
And for those interested in learning more about Genesis Fertilizers and that plant, where can they go for more information?
So I think there's a very good entry page into the Genesis Fertilizers website.
Let's get rolling with Real Ag Issues panel here on this Friday. This segment's brought to you by the Pioneer brand canola with, most importantly, Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here. Of course, Optimum Gly, also the sponsor of Real Agriculture's Agritechnica coverage from last fall, which is almost a year ago, which is hard to believe. You can find out more about Optimum Gly by going to pioneer.com/Canada. Let's bring in our panel. Up first, Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. I'm going to be in Ottawa next week. Looking forward to that. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm looking forward to you being here because we are almost in the best time of year for you to visit Ottawa. When the fall colors... Pumpkin spice season, as well as the fall colors. It is beautiful. It's going to be amazing. So, yes, welcome here.
I almost feel like an MP. I've been to Ottawa so much lately. I 2024, I'm going to break a record, trips to Ottawa.
Okay. You need like a little stamp card. I'll stamp it every time you're here.
Yeah, well, it does feel like a bit of a...
You get a free tour of Parliament after you get 10 visits.
To enter the bubble, you have to get your passport stamped?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a new thing.
Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner coming in of Altona, Manitoba, where I've been hearing some pretty phenomenal soybean yields coming out of Manitoba there, Kelvin.
Yeah, soybean harvest has started here the last couple of days, and we had enough late season moisture that some of the yields coming in so far are sounding pretty good, at least for what our provincial averages are around here. So, yeah, we're hoping to actually get our combine into the soybeans later this afternoon.
Well, pay attention, everybody, because also today on the panel, there is a lot of descriptions here. We've got keynote speaker. We've got farmer. And now we can add Nuffield Scholar to the front of her name. It is Cherilyn Nagel. Cherilyn, how's it going?
Hey, all. Yeah, I might put that one at the front of the list now. Nobody wants to hear me speak. If farming was a bust this harvest, I'm just going to start with Nuffield Scholar.
Yeah. Pretty cool. So congratulations.
Thank you. I really don't remember being this excited about my career trajectory in a really long time. This is, I'm pumped to do this. I wanted to do it, honestly, for more than a decade, and I just couldn't make the timing work. I couldn't bring myself to make the commitment. So I'm in. I'm 2 jumps in.
Yeah, you're going to get to travel the world, go all over the place without your husband. What?
I mean...
Well, no.
Oh, he's going with.
I think my husband.
He's going to come. She froze, but we'll bring her back. Okay, so he's going with you.
Yes.
Okay,
David and the kids will hopefully do some traveling with me. There's pieces of it that just won't be conducive to having anybody with me. Actually, David's not a backpacker at all. So anything that's going to require me going fast paced from country to country, he'll probably tap out. But if we can make it work, I really enjoy sharing those experiences with my family, bringing that back with them, bringing them along. I've taken, my youngest daughter came with me to Belgium. The families come with me. We went to Tokyo last December, and I don't have a great memory. So I like knowing what the kids and my husband took away, and then that becomes part of my notes, what they took away.
I've traveled with you and David, and I remember David and I sort of look at vacation the same. It's called the pub.
Yeah. Yes. He loves to learn how beer tastes.
Yes. Everywhere we went, it was just like David and I, like magnets to the pub. We just, yeah. So, well, that's awesome. Congratulations. We're going to talk more about your project here. coming up in a little bit. Kelvin, give us an update. We've got the Port of Vancouver that is still under strike. Now we hear today that the Port of Montreal has now served 72-hour strike notice. Wow, this is everybody gets to strike.
Yeah, it sure seems to be the season for labor unrest right now, and especially at ports, both in the U.S. and in Canada. Vancouver grain workers went on strike on Tuesday at all the main grain terminals. So right now those terminals are shut down. Some of the other unions in Vancouver are also looking at strike deadlines or waiting on decisions from the government regulator before they can go on strike here in the coming weeks. So there's possibility of more stoppages in Vancouver. And like you said, today we got 72-hour strike notice from, I believe it's just over 1,200 longshore workers at the Port of Montreal. So Port of Montreal is facing a 72-hour countdown right now in terms of getting prepared for a stoppage. And then, of course, in the U.S., there's this International Longshoremen's Association representing, I think it's around, is it 45,000 dock workers, 36 ports or something like that, potentially affected by a strike that could take place as soon as October 1st. So just a couple of days away as well. And so it sure seems that unions are flexing their muscles right now.
Yeah, we got Mexican rail issues. We got low river situations. Like we've got transportation issues galore here right now, Lyndsey. And the problem is that it definitely impacts farmers.
Well, absolutely it does. And, certainly the Port of Vancouver, the grain worker strike is a direct impact, obviously, on grain movement. But all of these other issues and all of these other ports, grain or agriculture products are going to be a part of that as well. So it could be equipment, it could be parts. So I think, though, what perhaps I'm frustrated by, and perhaps there's others as well, at least in Canada, I do get the sense that, the discussion with the Port of Montreal seems to be, because there are consumer products impacted, being looked at, perhaps more closely by media, by government, et cetera. And it really, yes, it's important, but it's really frustrating that the Port of Vancouver grain worker strike has already been ongoing for several days. We've heard almost nothing beyond the announcement that it was happening. And then, we've got all this focus on the Port of Montreal. And I'm not saying the Port of Montreal is not important, but we can't look at one and not be taking the other seriously. One of the things I really appreciated this week is we had senators. This is like a giant blinky light, everybody. When we have a group of senators calling out the government saying you're missing a giant issue, I really feel like the government has probably missed a giant issue when it's our senators that are bringing it to attention. And we did see that this week.
Yeah. The Senate has definitely become a little bit more, definitely more vocal. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily the rubber stamp like it probably once was, or we criticized it for being. Now, partly it's easier for them to speak freer because they're not elected, Cherilyn. And being someone from Alberta, that's one of our big bugaboos, so to speak, is that we should have an elected Senate. What do you think about the Senate being more vocal on some of these issues that are impacting farmers?
I think they have a job to do. I'm the sober second thought. That's always what comes to mind when I think about the Senate. They're supposed to be the sober second thought. I've been really relatively unimpressed with everything that's been coming out of there. They either take too long, they're not weighing in when they're supposed to be. This one sort of feels a bit odd that now is when all the big voices are going to come up. I do appreciate that they're saying something. I try to put myself in a position where if I was a senator, how would I behave? What are my rules of engagement? That's not a pitch. I know Lyndsey's already on a mission here. No. We're going to get her there.
I keep getting
but what is the role of that? And how do I participate? And I think I would be loud on almost every issue. Pretty sure about that. So I guess I can't negate them for speaking up on this one.
Now, Lyndsey wants to be a senator. I'm more bidding for ambassador to the UK. That's more
because of the pups. We've established
again. Yes. And then David's going to come visit, and
exactly.
Just going to drink Guinness.
Mm-hmm. I'll be the ambassador to China, and I'll come visit you because you won't come visit me.
I don't want that gig.
That's accurate, actually.
I don't want that gig at all. No,
the Chinese know their beer. They're onto the beer.
It's a little light.
Can we focus on the other Chinese issues?
Yeah, we will.
They're much larger ones.
I want to just the bill C-282 because this does involve the Senate. So, Kelvin, we've got the government in trouble trying to hold itself together. The Bloc is sort of the glue at this point, but they have given an ultimatum to Trudeau, and it involves supply management. Give us the update before we listen to the audio from Minister McCauley.
Yeah, the Bloc Québécois has said as of yesterday, well, they gave this list last week. There's 2 items that they want to see to start to continue to support the government. This is them propping up the Liberal minority. One is that they'd like to see some funding for increased benefits for old age security. And the second one is the passage of Bill C-282, which is the legislation, the private member's bill that prevents Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister from negotiating supply management or trade access away in future trade negotiations. They could, of course, repeal that legislation if it came down to it, but that's the intent of this bill. C-282 is currently at the Senate committee stage, the trade committee stage, and there are quite a few senators on that committee. I don't know if it's a majority that voted against. It's not a majority that voted against it at second reading, but there is some concern among senators about this bill, and so it'll be interesting now whether this Senate, these senators, again, as we just talked about, what Cherilyn was referencing, raise their voice on this, and potentially they have an influential decision to make here on whether the government continues to stand or not, because the Bloc has given an October 29th deadline here, so basically a month to get both of these items across the finish line. Otherwise, they say they're going to pull their support from the Liberal minority government. And so that's something to pay attention to. The timeline is on, or the countdown is on now for getting this bill across the finish line. And there are some senators that have expressed opposition to it, including the chair and the deputy chair of the trade committee have both said they don't support C-282. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Senate.
Could you imagine a situation where the Senate's just like, no, we're holding on to it, right? It's just going to sit here for a while. And the government falls because the Senate doesn't move it back to the House?
Well, and that's where the independents, these are senators that are so-called independent. Most of them have been appointed by Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, although Trudeau, he likes to use that word independent for the appointees he's made. Yeah. But we've seen with C-234 last year where Liberal cabinet ministers were calling senators to influence their vote at the committee stage, and I'm curious whether we'll see the same thing here, because the government, of course, wants to stay in power for now, doesn't want to fall due to something like this.
Yeah, well, here's what Minister McCauley, he was challenged yesterday, I think it was by a Bloc member, about whether or not the government supports supply management. Here's what Minister McCauley had to say yesterday in Parliament.
The Honourable Minister.
Sir, Agri-Food. Say, Mr. President. Our government, of course, supports supply management. The honourable colleague is well aware that we supported Bill C-282 because, of course, we have and always will support supply management. Unlike the Conservatives who fell shamefully behind when important funding for supply management came towards the House and they voted against it. I think my honourable colleague is fully aware we have and will continue to support supply management. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Cherilyn, I have said frequently in my speeches throughout this whole year that too many times I think we have made 282 about whether you support or don't support supply management. I think that's way too simple. I think the fact is that this is honestly, I can't come up with a better word, the dumbest idea. And at a time where we are trying to hold potentially a free trade agreement and better trade relations with the Americans together, we're going to kind of stick a poke in their eye and say, hey, by the way, we're not giving you any more access no matter what. I think it actually puts a little bit of meat on the bone for them to chase it even harder. What say you?
And my heart rate elevates. Like, I feel like my head is going to explode. When Kelvin said there was some concerns about this bill, I just about lose my mind. I'm so angry about this. I cannot believe that. I think it was actually CAFTA, the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, came out with a piece just this last week. And I think they titled it, "Don't Hold the Economy Hostage to Supply Management." That is exactly how I feel. I cannot believe that we are being held hostage by such a small piece of this puzzle. And I don't like to pit farmers against farmers, the agriculture industry against each other, but this is ludicrous. I'm tired of even dancing around it, calling it some sort of concern. It's bullshit. Canada is supposed to be rules-based. We have advocated for rules-based trading everywhere we go. The hypocrisy around, the the Prime Minister stepping up for the EV industry, the aluminum and steel, now the retaliation, anti-dumping with canola. We are a mess, an absolute mess, and I can't stand the hypocrisy anymore. Somebody has to start talking about Canada's reliance on trade and how it's absolutely crucial and important. Don't pretend like it isn't, and we just need a few votes in Quebec to make it better. It's crucial for the economy. I'm sick and tired of this conversation.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into that EV situation, how it connects to canola, and how quickly could we see duties being applied to Canadian canola going into China. We'll be right back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Calling all Montana, Dakotas, and northern Minnesota growers. Are you looking for a profitable addition to your farm that can deliver value beyond yield? The new Seed Omega-3 canola production system can help you unlock a guaranteed path to market with attractive premium opportunities and an active God clause. Contracts include first-in-class agronomy support and free on-farm pickup after harvest. Contracts are available now. Commit early to maximize your opportunity. To learn more, visit omega3canola.com.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, protect your and higher ammonia, and bottom line, even if temperatures dip below 15 degrees, that's not too late to apply agronomically effective, non-corrosive Centuro nitrogen stabilizer. Learn more at centuro.ca. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, and Cherilyn Nagel on the panel here today. Okay, gang, let's talk about canola. There's lots of canola news happening, and all of Canada pay attention to this because I think a lot of this impacts many of you because canola may just be the beginning. So we saw Canada apply 100% tariff on EVs coming out of China. China retaliated a week later and said, we're accusing Canada of anti-dumping. We're going to have an investigation on this. It could take upwards of a year. Kelvin, I've been hearing rumors this week we could see some duties applied on Canadian canola as early as beginning of November.
Yeah, that's something that we keep the grain trade, especially, and grain companies, of course, have customers overseas that they're talking to in China. And so November, December, January, we've heard those months mentioned in several different places now, but I can't say that we have any confirmed communications from the Chinese government, at least on that side of things. Their timeline for their investigation is until September of next year. So they gave themselves a full 12 months, and they can actually, in the case, and as happened in the case with barley from Australia, they extended that timeline by 6 months. So it could actually be 18 months before they make a decision. That being said, they may choose to do it sooner, as the grain trade is kind of hinting at here. Again, unconfirmed. But at the same time, this ties in with our conversation just barely about the strike in Vancouver. Wade Sivkovich told Lyndsey on the show this week that grain companies are trying to get as much canola to China as quickly as possible right now. And the union knows that. That's one of their leverage strengths in this strike that's taking place at Vancouver right now. But grain companies are trying to get that canola to China to beat and get ahead of those potential tariffs or bans or whatever type of retaliation there could be coming. Again, we don't know that that's even going to happen for sure, but grain companies certainly are acting as if they're expecting it to come soon.
I feel like we need to increase our trade resources, Lyndsey. Like there is a lot of trouble in the current environment and on the future horizon. That's something I think the government's going to need to think about under a liberal conservative government.
We're sleeping on this file. It's not happening.
Yeah, to quote Cherilyn, we are a mess. And it is true. Like when we start tallying up all the things on our plate right now, domestically, internationally, North America wide, trade deals, like research into dumping, like when you start to add all these things up, it is a monumental task as far as working all these puzzle pieces into play, considering what we need to do for our economy, which, like, hello, that's our farmers, that's our exports. We need to be paying attention here. And it just feels like there's a lot of moving parts that people are pointing at and saying, what are we doing about this? And we don't have any good answers from this government. And I don't care if it's this government into the spring or a new government this fall, whatever it may be, all of these files need some serious attention and serious people power before them, because we are up against, really over the next 18 months, huge amounts of what could be very costly decisions that get made that will absolutely negatively impact Canada if we're not actually taking this seriously and dealing with it.
Yeah, and Cherilyn, go ahead, Kelvin.
I was just going to say quickly, Canada's a middleweight country. We're in a boxing ring with a bunch of heavyweights.
Yeah,
we got to be smart. We have to invest in being prepared and having a plan and all those types of things. And that's where the Canadian government isn't giving due attention to this. Sorry, go ahead, Cheryl.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, I like the boxing analogy.
Oh, well, Kelvin, look, if you watch the Colbert-Trudeau interview, I would say Canada is a lightweight at best.
Oh, maybe gave it too much credit, yeah.
Lightweight at best.
Gary Ritz used to use the phrase that Canada punches above its weight, and that's something that we got to, I think, continue to aspire to.
True. Shaun, at the top of the segment, you talked about optimum GLY is what's next in canola happens here. I disagree. What's next in canola happens in politics, whether it's our issues with China, whether it is 45Z in the U.S. We've got a renegotiation of USMCA coming up. The political strategies around trade are real. They're true. I have full respect and appreciation for them. I just don't think it's too much to ask for a little acknowledgement that canola is a pawn. That Western Canadian farmers, canola farmers right now in Canada, are a pawn in all of this, and it should be recognized. No one's saying that.
So I think, when we look at biofuel policy, a big piece of that was to diversify away from ever having to really worry about trade to China, because China is not a good trading partner, right? China is, and I remember Cam Dahl when he was with Cereals Canada, China is not Japan. Japan is a consistent buyer, stable buyer, focused on quality. That is not China. And so there was a big push for renewable diesel. Well, now on top of the China situation, there's some concern in biofuel circles when it comes to how Canada could be potentially treated under 45Z, which is essentially a tax credit under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, for fuel producers, upwards of about $1 a gallon if they take advantage of all the multipliers. That's pretty substantial. And there's a push on both the House and the Senate side in the U.S. for only domestic production to qualify. Now, does domestic production mean only U.S., or does it also include countries like Canada as a part of North America? That is what is being debated in the hallways and behind the scenes. But Kelvin, it's easy to focus on the China situation, but I think this situation with 45Z is just as consequential in terms of demand for canola going forward.
Yeah, and this is domestic demand. This is what's driving the creation of an investment in crush plant capacity in Saskatchewan and in Western Canada. It is this renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, on the horizon, that demand. Here in Canada, we're seeing pressure against the clean fuel regulations, the Conservatives calling it a second carbon tax. And so there's uncertainty there in terms of what that mandated demand will be in Canada. And I think that was really just a small portion, a slice of the pie, maybe even a drop in the bucket of future demand that the canola industry has been anticipating compared to what's coming out of the U.S. And this 45Z or Z tax credit was expected to be a big part of this. And right now, this legislation that was introduced in both houses in the U.S. this week to only use domestic feedstocks, like you said, Shaun, this is mainly about targeting the UCO, the used cooking oil issue, the imports that have skyrocketed from Asia and maybe South American stuff coming in as well. Canola's kind of been outside of the picture and maybe not considered in this decision in bringing this legislation forward, and now canola's left hanging what about this investment in crush capacity that we're expecting to supply into the U.S. Biofuel market? That's a big question mark right now. And like you said, in the long term, this could have a bigger impact to the structure of our canola industry and canola market than even the Chinese demand situation.
And similar to what's happened with the USMCA and the dairy dispute on how Canada's allocated TRQs, a last resort here is that we have to use the USMCA agreement to challenge the 45Z tax credit and not basically keeping Canadian canola out. And I think in the northern tier, like in Montana and North Dakota, there's got to be concern. There's a lot of opportunity for acre growth, but it doesn't have the scale at this point. Like there's not 20 million acres of canola in the northern tier or in the U.S., the whole entire U.S. for that matter. So is canola kind of left out of renewable diesel because it doesn't have the scale and it doesn't, and also there's the carbon intensity score. I don't want to get
carbon intensity score is another issue on this if we want to get into the weeds. Yeah, that's where canola intensity score, there's some arbitrary, or the industry at least believes there's arbitrary decisions that have been made there in terms of how it's weighted compared to competitors. So you referenced the USMCA dispute settlement process. That's only in place for another year and a half, and both candidates in the US presidential race right now are speaking quite negatively about USMCA. And so what happens, like, I'm not sure we should depend on even triggering a dispute at this point. I'm not sure it would ever be resolved, and a new deal likely won't have the same dispute resolution mechanism. This one hasn't seemed to have worked very well. So
hey, I want Cherilyn's reaction here. So here's what I've heard. So I've heard from a lot of farmers in Western Canada specific to canola, and I will say this: it's pretty even in terms of support for biofuels, Western Canada and Eastern Canada. We got the data at RealAgriculture studies to show that. Okay, and it's pretty neutral in terms of how what Canadian farmers feel about biofuels. So if our attitude is that the clean fuel regulation is a second carbon tax and we don't need, be subsidizing biofuel capacity in the country, we'll just ship the exported, we'll just ship canola seed and corn, we'll just ship it south and let the Americans take care of it. If we don't qualify for the tax credit, what the heck are we going to do? We're not going to participate at all when it comes to biofuel. Cherilyn, what's your feeling on the biofuel policy in Canada, the clean fuel regulation? Do you have a thought on that?
I think your survey is the same as my Ask Everybody I Know survey, where we're all over the map in terms of support for biofuels. In some of the articles I read about this particular issue, there was some pretty grandiose statements about, farmers really working hard to grow these grains for sustainable fuels and all of that. I don't know how much stock I really put in that. Farmers want more markets. We want less dependency on such a few things to grow and such a few market. That's the reality. We're not going to bed at night going, how can I help the environment grow a better fuel? We're taxed right now to the balls. So we're trying to just get by. We need less, just to sum it up, we need less reliance on China. We need more options for where our products are going to go, all of our products. And all we can hope for is an invite to the family reunion so that Canada is considered domestic under this, this new regulation. That's all we can really hope for. If we're not, it's devastating.
Hey, Lyndsey, I want to get your thoughts on what Senator Grassley had to say on Monday's show of AgriTalk, talking about how he feels it should only be domestically produced production. Here is Senator Grassley's comments.
They should be out by December. I don't know whether they'll be out. Maybe the election will have a impact on when they come out, if they come out. But there's a couple things I think that we're trying to get the Treasury Department to take into consideration. We shouldn't be subsidizing virgin palm oil like we do used cooking oil. And if the two are mixed together, we ought to be able to make sure none of it gets the credit. And I think it's wrong to be subsidizing imports into the United States to compete against our own soybeans. So I'd like to have 45Z just apply to our domestic production. It's one thing to have the competition from Argentina and Brazil for our Midwestern crops, but it's another thing to subsidize the imports.
Lyndsey, this is what we saw with Product of USA label changes. The focus was on beef coming out of Uruguay that was repackaged and a Product USA label was put on it. And all of a sudden the changes happen and beef out of Canada is now facing the most restrictive label that exists in the world. This kind of feels a little bit similar potentially. It's a little bit terrifying.
It is very similar. I believe the term is throwing the baby out with the bathwater on some of these things, right? In that, or collateral damage, whatever you want to call it. I'm also going to comment, I think the collective age of the two men in clips today in the show is like almost 200. But anyway, just throwing that out there. But this really is and could be potentially where on paper or in a room, somebody's making this statement like this, where it's like, hey, we shouldn't be subsidizing, stuff coming in from elsewhere, without necessarily taking into account some of the tried and true supply chains that go back and forth between Canada and the US, or Canada and Mexico, which we also got some news on that this week, that it really fails to actually grasp, do you really want to be punishing one of your best neighbors? And maybe that's a neighbor, and especially in the case of beef, that we actually have fully integrated into our supply chains, and it works going north and south. So this idea that we're going to vilify all imports and treat them all the same fails to really take into account the actual details of the trade transactions that happen and who you're actually punishing. To go even maybe just a little bit into the weeds, yes, okay, so soybean production is American, it's domestic, it's whatever. And yes, we have this carbon intensity score, and soybeans gets this great, it has an advantage because you don't apply nitrogen. Soybeans leave absolutely no residue, like none whatsoever. So if we're thinking about like, okay, what's the point of the carbon intensity score? It's supposed to be that we want things that are lower greenhouse gas emissions, that are healthier for the environment, etc. Canola does a lot more for the environment in a lot of ways than soybeans is going to. So like, again, it's oversimplifying something that is actually really complex. And it does feel like the states, regardless of which party you're with, right now is taking simplistic protectionist views on a whole bunch of our commodities and aren't really fully thinking about the supply chains and the value chains that we have integrated north and south.
Yeah, Kamala Harris, VP Harris, was tweeting, I think it was yesterday, talking about how, she's one of the 10 senators that voted against the USMCA. So if you think there's just trouble with USMCA when it comes to potentially another Trump administration, I think you should look at the other side as well. So it's some challenges ahead for Canada. Hey, the best answer for agronomically effective dual nitrogen protection is Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how this ready-to-use granular fertilizer protects nitrogen and boosts efficiency, visit kochag.ca. We'll be right back on Real Ag Radio with the question of, is your pickup truck a killer? Whew. Sounds terrifying. We'll talk when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147.
Make your neighbors envious with CDC Envy CWRS. Introducing CDC Envy CWRS, the latest wheat variety now available for Plant 25 from Alliance Seed. This semi-dwarf wheat delivers impressive yields, early maturity, outstanding standability, and a robust disease package. With CDC Envy, your wheat crop will be the talk of the town. Learn more and find your nearest retailer at allianceseed.com or call 1-877-270-2890.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Experience the most efficient system for delivering sulfur and phosphate to meet your crop's needs with Smart Nutrition MAP plus MST. Okay, we got a Real Ag Issues panel, and we are joined here today by Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, and Cherilyn Nagel, Nuffield Scholar. Cherilyn Nagel, I should add. Officially. There's an article, there's been a number of these kind of articles in the Globe and Mail, but The Economist, front page, okay, big truck on the front of it for those of you watching on YouTube. And it says, America's killer cars. And I'll just read you quickly, then I'll get your reaction to it. The country's roads are nearly twice as dangerous as the rich world average. It doesn't have to be that way. Weight is to blame. Using data for 7.5 million crashes in 14 American states from 13 through 23, we found that for every 10,000 crashes, the heaviest vehicles killed 37 people in the other car, compared with 5.7 for cars of a median weight and just 2.6 for the lightest. Okay. The situation is getting worse. In 2023, 31% of new cars in America weighed over 5,000 pounds, compared with 22% in 2018. The number of pedestrians killed by cars has almost doubled since 2010. The article does point out, too, electric vehicles not solving the problem here, because they are more, smaller cars that are electric, much more heavier due to the batteries than their gas counterparts. Kelvin, is this a big deal? Should we be making a big deal about this, and what comes of it?
Well, I guess, yeah, from a safety perspective, and I know I have a brother who's an engineer, and he's brought this point up before in conversations I've had with him. So this is a familiar conversation. He's also made the point that vehicles that we drive in North America now, look how many SUVs and trucks there are. Vehicles are taller than they've always been. And so from a pedestrian accident perspective, this sounds like this was more collisions between different vehicles. But pedestrian safety has also declined, because think about it. You used to, if you were hit by a car as a pedestrian, it took out your knees and you broke your legs or your lower body. Now it hits you in a fatal, a higher chance of a fatality. And so you look at the cars that manufacturers are making, they're hardly making cars. Ford makes a Mustang. Does Ford make any cars? I don't think they do right now. The smallest vehicle that Ford, a domestic manufacturer, makes is an SUV. And so that right there, I think there's some justification to this, but at the same time, we know pickup trucks are necessary. They are a practical tool on the farm and in rural areas. It's part of it. You need it when you live in a rural area in many situations. And so I sure hope that the practicality of trucks doesn't get lost if there's some type of policy decisions that are made around this.
Well, think about how different Wayne's World would have been. Remember when she's like, "Hey, Wayne," and she hits the car? Remember how she flies over the top of it? Nowadays, Stacy would just go whack
down. And then she wouldn't have the neck brace. And then how would she make the gun rack? Anyway,
that would have been all different.
There's a generation of people listening who have no idea what we're talking about. Anyway, it would be very different.
Do we know what we're talking about?
I'm on a streak here about 4 weeks in a row with very good movie references.
Very good. I like that's what we're going with. Very good movie.
Self-evaluated.
I did like the hi, Wayne, because
it's the best part of that movie.
Okay. I thought you meant like the little AMC Pacer with the licorice thing on the roof and they were all singing in it, but you meant the truck, so never mind. It's fine.
Cherilyn, what do you think about this? I guess what would be your reaction if there was some more higher amount of regulation in this department, like where, hey, you can't own a pickup truck. We need to eliminate pickup trucks because of some of this data. And this data is important. Don't get me wrong. Like there's death involved, but it feels like pickup trucks are getting a bit of some attention here.
You lost me at higher regulation, Shaun.
That's fair. I think you cut out there. You know what we need to do is regulate better internet. That's what we need to regulate. Are you there, Cherilyn?
Yeah. No, you really lost me at higher regulation.
Yeah.
She just hung up. She just left.
I'm out of here. Mic drop. Lyndsey, what's your thoughts?
Oh, Cherilyn, go ahead.
Oh, Cherilyn's there?
Yep.
Nope.
Or not.
She's not. Lyndsey, go ahead.
No, she's not. Okay. No, I mean, realistically, I think it's interesting to see these stats. I think, when we also look at this in relation to vehicles have a lot more safety regulations than they used to. We have airbags, we have whatever. So it's even worse, actually, if you think about it, because we should have safer vehicles. Although if you've ever watched those crash test videos, some of these brand new vehicles have zero. It doesn't look like they have any sort of safety features at all. Anyway, I mean, realistically, do we really want rules as to what people decide and purchase? It's a slippery slope. At the same time, realistically, we need access to bigger vehicles for a lot of things, like Kelvin alluded to, and I wouldn't want to see that being limited in any way. But when people are shopping for a new vehicle, do you really need the giant SUV? Probably not, but you probably want it. So it all comes down to choice.
I just hope if we go down this route that we treat heavy EVs the same. Treat heavy gas powered, and I have a feeling that is not what we will do, because some of this activist pressure has a lot to do with the fact that finding any angle, any way that we can really eliminate some of these gas powered vehicles. Mm-hmm. Conspiracy theorist, me or not?
And vehicles that use more higher amount of gas or fuel.
That is true. Cherilyn, what I would like to hear from you is what your Nuffield Scholarship is about. I think we may have just lost her, period.
Okay, I'm here.
There you are.
Go ahead.
Okay, you're there. Go ahead.
Well, I had time to think about the movie thing, and if you cast me in the role of Thelma and Louise, I wouldn't be driving a car. I would drive a big truck, because that would make so much more sense. But regardless, when in the opening piece, Shaun, you talked about the country's roads, the stats on this in the country's roads, that's different than the country roads, which is where most of your audience would be driving these trucks that really do and truthfully serve a purpose. We buy trucks and SUVs here, even for our kids. We want that wide wheelbase. I want the safety. I want to know that if, a big buck jumps out of the road, that they're going to win that fight. So for me, safety, it is about safety. It is about the wild wheelbase. It is about gravel that chews up the bottom of every vehicle that we own. I'm not going to make any changes whatsoever, and I sure hope they don't regulate this.
And snow drifts and ditch banging with the vehicle too, right, Cherilyn?
Exactly.
Good old ditch bang.
Traction control.
Yeah. This is important.
There needs to be a rating for ditch banging. Okay, Cherilyn, I want to hear about your Nuffield Scholarship.
Oh, okay. Okay, tell me what you want. Do you know about the program?
Well, we do. We know a lot about it. Nuffield is a great program. What's your project about, and where do you think you're going to be going?
Yeah. Okay, great. So part of your commitment to Nuffield is to choose your own study topic, your own area of interest. They give you an awful lot of autonomy to choose where you want to go to study it. And I actually had originally chosen the topic trying to understand if an international farmer could be of influence in domestic policy. Because I'd experienced that myself. But if I go over to Belgium and say the same things those farmers are, if I go over here, if we bring over farmers from other countries and we have them say this stuff here, it opens people's eyes. But at the last minute, I changed my mind. A top of mind for me right now is kind of the Wild West we're going through as it relates to land bases in agriculture. So the topic I'm choosing to study is the impacts of renewable energy infrastructure on agricultural land, both in terms of production volume and land valuation. And I feel like the study of land use specific to renewable energy has become increasingly relevant. We've got a government that is pushing us to move away from coal. Saskatchewan is very dependent on coal. That's not the future of energy. So we have to look at other options. Unfortunately, the use of that land, the priority use of that land appears to me to be a secondary thought and not a priority whatsoever. We've got both the federal government and the provincial government indicating that we need to increase our exports, whether that's for food commodities or other commodities. So we've got this dichotomy happening where we have to increase exports. It's important for our GDP, but we're also wanting to use highly productive land for such things like solar farms and wind turbines. So where are the Am I back?
Yep. You're back.
Sorry about that. Are we looking at the policy framework guidelines that we can learn from? Are there other places in the world that have best practices, that have that policy framework guideline that can ensure Canada has a robust decision-making process regarding land use for renewable energy projects? So that's what I'm going to study over the next couple of years.
Well, you're lucky because we have a resident solar grazer.
We do.
Yeah. So, Lyndsey, what's your question?
Well, So I think it's fantastic because these are incredibly important questions, right? Is we have a finite amount of land. What can we do with it? Should we have, or what should the rules and regulations look like for that? What is the best use or most productive use for pieces of land? So I think it's a phenomenal question. And Saskatchewan's in a really interesting place. So I'm glad Cherilyn's doing this because we've seen, of course, the rise of solar and solar grazing that goes along with it in Ontario and Alberta. But Manitoba and Saskatchewan, so Manitoba has hydro. So they're not really going to move towards something like solar or wind power as quickly, although certainly there's wind power in Manitoba.
Last week.
Yeah.
More wind power last week.
More wind power, but maybe not solar, whereas Saskatchewan that may be where it goes. So Cherilyn, I want to know where you're going to go because you are more than welcome to come and check out what solar grazing looks like here in Ontario. But I can also think of all sorts of places worldwide that you could go, obviously just for that part, but there's more. Also, I do want to point out there is phenomenal amounts of research happening in the US about solar grazing. So Cornell University is doing a lot. Like there are some pretty amazing research projects happening right now in the US. So I would imagine you're heading there too, but it's pretty cool thinking about the soil health benefits, thinking about the pollinator habitat, thinking about the perennial cover, thinking about drought management. It's pretty amazing to see what you can actually grow under panels. So I'm super excited because the more research, the better.
Well, I also think renewable fuels fits into this too.
Yeah, how does canola fit into this, right? Or wheat for ethanol. Yeah. I mean, that's renewables.
Yeah. Cherilyn, you got your work cut out for you. Good luck.
Yeah, all of those things. I think it's incredibly interesting and just a really relevant topic right now. And to be clear for the farmers listening, I do not want to stand in the way of any farmer or landowner diversifying, having another opportunity, another use for their land. We've gone through 8 years of drought out here. Who wouldn't want another revenue stream if that was possible? So I don't want to stand in the way of that. I want to explore that as an opportunity. I just want to know, are the policies that are in place guiding us towards our priorities as a country and our priorities as a province, or is it really just the Wild West out there?
Or where do we stand? Are we actually falling behind? Are we like way behind in this area? That's one question that I always have when we talk about this issue and a whole bunch of others. Hey, we're out of time, gang. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. Lyndsey, have yourself a great weekend.
Everyone else as well.
Take care of those sheep. Kelvin, good luck with those soybeans.
Thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
I've been hearing some pretty big numbers out of Manitoba when it comes to soybean yield. And Cherilyn, I don't know what goes on in Mossbank on the weekend, but it's going to be fun. I guarantee you that. Have yourself a great time.
Thanks so much. There's a lot going on, but we don't talk about it.
Yeah, that's for in between commercials.
Yeah.
If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. I encourage you over the weekend to go to RealAgriculture.com to keep up to date on everything that is happening in the world of agriculture. Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we'll of course chat again on Monday. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.